Hello there! Car videos seem to be all the rage nowadays, so here's one from me. Um, my name's Dr. Dan. I am a stats nerd, and I'm Doctor of Philosophy. So there's like, I didn't. This video is not going to be too long because I'm just waiting for my son to arrive from a school trip. Apparently, he's going to be half an hour late, so I have that much time. So it might be that long, which is quite long, isn't it? I probably should orient the thing landscape, but so there's been a few videos recently and a bit of conversation online. The first thing I'd like to talk about is actually, what things do I need to talk about? Let's do a list. So I need to talk about Pash, because on a recent thing he mentioned that there's a philosophy discussion, and I think he's right, and I think I can explain what the philosophical discussion is. Secondly, we need to talk about Games Workshop don't change. I'm not telling Games Workshop to not change. They really should, but they just don't. So that's that. And we should really not be surprised when they behave in the way that they do. You know, when a tiger bites you, you know, you've got no real right to complain. It's a tiger. What do you expect? And the third thing that I wanted to talk about is essentially, where the hell is the old world game? Like, where the... Because it's not in the old world, because... Well, we'll come on to that in a second. So let's first talk about Pash. Pash did a video a while ago about... a while ago about, you know, the Renegade pack, and does it really make any difference? I'm still awaiting the data from Gomo. He did offer it a while ago, said he could give me a spreadsheet with all the data off his website, off Old World Rankings, which once I get that, I'm going to do like some difference testing, and I'll write it up as like as a little bit of a paper, but I'll give that to him first and see if he wants to do a video first. But I want to do some difference testing to see whether statistically, oh sorry, let me just sit up a bit, I'm uncomfortable, to see whether there is a difference between whether the Renegade pack actually is making any kind of statistically significant difference. I suspect it is, but I suspect the effect is minimal. You know, because essentially the revisions are quite minimal. And you know, the one thing that they need to do is make all the non-supported factions better. Apart from vampire counts, they need to make them worse, and that would essentially rebalance a few bits of the game. But I don't really feel like they've done that. But I think they're a bit more of a tool for clarification. And I know there's been a bit of revision recently of the Renegade pack to kind of try and add a little bit to those underperforming factions and take a little bit away from those overperforming factions, but I don't really think they'll have the impact. We need full arcane journals for all those factions. So, you know, before you go anywhere, I have written one for Skaven. If I get some good feedback down below, I'll publish it, and then I'll put it on a Discord thing, and then you'll all have to join my Discord, I'm afraid. But that'll literally just be so I can put the manuals on there, and so we can like alpha test and beta test and all the rest. That's kind of the plan. The plan there. So yeah, if you want my Skaven Arcane Journal, then fine. If I get good feedback, I'll write the others. But because to be fair, actually, I've taken about a day. I've taken 2 afternoons on it. So you know, and I've got the Grand Army. I've got 2 sub factions, Pestilence and Eshin. Because I think that those two function very differently to the Grand Army. And yeah, I've got 2 special characters, one of which is actually a lizardman, which I just thought a bit outside the box for one of them, really. Skorchkar, I've called him. But anyway, so yeah, if you want to hear that. But anyway, back to Renegades. I mean, Pasha's got a fairly unique take on it, because essentially, like he said, and he said this to me, he doesn't go to very many events where people really play them. So, you know, he doesn't really see the point. You know, he doesn't really have much of an opinion or anything on them. But, you know, I think that's more or less his point, that he doesn't really see a lot of them. So, you know, is there really that much is there really that much point in does it really make any difference? You know, maybe not, maybe it does. You know, I think something needs doing, but you know, I don't think what the guys over at Squarebased, as good as their content is, and you know, as you know, I love Rob's events. I'm given to understand that Val's events are excellent. I'm not over there. It's an ocean away, and so I've not been to any. But you know, I quite like their videos. They're a bit too energetic for me. You know, I like listening to people just waffle on. You know, I love watching 48 Hours, for instance, which is like a true crime thing. That's one of my favourite YouTube channels. You know, it's quite sedate and calm, you know, whereas all this at the start of the video, it's just like, you know, I'm a bit like, oh god. It's just a bit, oh really. But you know, that's just a tiny I normally just skip the first 5 minutes of all their videos, to be honest. But just, I don't need that. But that's, you know, that's the stiff upper lip, you know, coming out like, ooh, you know, do you have to do that? And of course he does, because you know, he's Canadian, and they have a bit more energy about them than us Brits. Us Brits are grumpy, boring buggers. Whereas, you know, Canadians are a bit more positive, aren't they? You know, compared to your average Brit who'd anyway, let's not talk about national stereotypes anymore. I probably shouldn't have mentioned it at all, and that's why I'm waffling on, because I feel I've offended somebody accidentally. I didn't. If so, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. But anyway, going back to, you know, and I think this is where the debate comes in, is between people who, you know, and I've had I've had people run other channels take the piss out of me, like not directly, but like they've said a few things that I think, you know, that surely is a dig at me. And you know, it is, everybody who runs one of these channels, I think, has played some competitive Warhammer, right? So we're all competitive people. So it's really unsurprising that when we put out channel content, we are naturally inclined to compete with each other for views. But I really don't think we should be competing with each other, because really the big problem is Games Workshop and how they conduct themselves and how they treat their customers and how they treat their staff. Actually, it's all pretty abysmal. You know, they're very manipulative of their customers. You know, they're a very successful business because they're very manipulative of their customers, and because, you know, in general, they're not particularly nice to their staff either. So, you know, unless you're one of like the inner circle at Lenton, you have a pretty rough ride as an employee of Games Workshop. And there are tons and tons of posts, YouTube videos, all that from like ex-staff members who, you know, will pretty much confirm that. So, you know, GW is a tiger, and it will bite you. And, you know, you look at the old world as being a really good case in point of that, because, you know, essentially they lost control of the game. They made the game by 8th almost unplayable, because rules creep had just got way out of control. They made the game unplayable. It then got really unpopular because it was like, you know, borderline unplayable, and they blamed its lack of popularity on the fact that it had square bases and that people weren't interested in rank and flank games anymore, is what they said. I mean, that was a lie. Big corporations lie. Pretty much everything they say is a lie. So, you know, you take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, the reality was that they were having an IP problem. You know, I think it was Kings of War, was it called, or Flames of War, or Kings of some, anyway, what, you know the game. I've got it in my head, I just can't remember what it's bloody called. But that one was, you know, they'd gone for evil knights instead of chaos warriors. They'd gone for feudal something or other instead of, or, you know, or Flemish knights, or Breton knights or something instead of Bretonians, or, you know, Teutonic forces or something like that instead of the forces of the Empire or whatever. So, you know, from an IP perspective, like it was pretty bad. You know, Warhammer Fantasy was pretty bad for them. So, you know, they basically decided to ditch it, move to round bases because it meant that they didn't have to produce square bases anymore. And, you know, there was a whole load of business reasons as to why ditching Fantasy was a decent idea. But the reality was that the reason it was unpopular is because they'd made the game pretty difficult to play in any kind of balanced manner. And, you know, game balance really does matter, because unless you've got like... So the reason that balancing stuff, and the reason that I think tournament stats are so important, is that essentially that tournaments test the game to, you know, to its breaking point, right? And tournaments show how broken the game actually is. So, you know, the stats at tournaments are indicative of how, because like, take for example, like somebody who, you know, had played, let's say somebody who's played Cathay a lot on Warhammer Total War because they really like the way the faction played, and maybe they have a real thing for balloons because they think they're super cool. I mean, they work pretty well in Warhammer Total War, to be honest. I think you could make a doom stack out of them, probably. I mean, I've never done it, but I think it's possible, I guess. You might need a few rocket batteries or something else. But anyway, yeah, I think you could... Anyway, so somebody who really likes balloons, right? They see the balloons, they get the army list, they don't really realise how good they are, and then they try and cram as many balloons into a list. They buy 3 of them, which are maybe even, I think you could fit 4 in a list, historically. But like, they have loads and loads of balloons because they think, oh, these are mega cool, and I can have loads of them in an army. I can have 3. And they're huge things, and the models are great. And so they get that, they plop it on a table against their friend who plays, like, I don't know, Night Goblins or something, and then they absolutely wipe the floor with them, you know, without really much understanding of the rules or whatever. And yeah, they just absolutely wipe the floor with these greenskins, and, you know, both players are sat there like, that wasn't really that much. I mean, the Cathay guy is probably a bit happier because he's like, he got to blow up a load of green things. But like, both of them are sat there like, that wasn't really a satisfying contest. That wasn't massively close. That felt like something wrong. Let's play that again. And then they do the same thing again, and then the Cathay bloke just walks, you know, wipes the floor with him, and then they're like, you know, so it needs, if the game is massively unbalanced, it can lead to like negative play environments in like the more social community settings. So actually game balance is really important in terms of like making sure that people are having fun all over the shop, really. So, you know, I think that's quite important. You know, making sure that we're on top of the meta and making sure the game is balanced makes the game more fun, because really what you want on a tabletop is a good close contest with ideally you coming out on top slightly because you've made a genius tactical decision around about turn 3. That's kind of what everybody wants, because those games are more fun. The close games are the ones the ones where you have to actually count everything up at the end because you don't really know what happened. They're the best. Like, the best game I think I've ever had was actually at one of Rob Syme's tournaments against a chap who's got a channel called Andy 2D6, I think he is. And I played his dwarves, and I thought he'd won it actually, but then we counted up the victory points at the end, and I just won it. But it felt like he'd won it somehow. So that was my favourite game, because it was just like, that was so tough. Like, loads of stuff went wrong, and for both of us, and like both of us at the end of it were like, whew, I have no idea what happened then, but it was great. You know, that was probably my favourite game. That's probably been my favourite game of all time in terms of like that real tight contest. It's a bit like, you know, you played 80 minutes of rugby and your face has been in the mud so much you don't really know what the result is, and then you look up the scoreboard, you're like, oh bloody hell, we've won, bonus point as well. Well, didn't expect that. You know, that's pretty cool. So yeah, so Games Workshop will continue to do Games Workshop things. I mean, I remember talking to one of the rules writers for, I won't identify what, it wasn't the Old World, but I remember talking to one of the rules writers, and they explained to me that essentially how the things work is the sculptors come up with a model, the business people, the business guys at GW work out how much profit they can make off it, and then the rules writers are told to write rules for these models, and they're told which ones to make really good, because they're the most profitable lines, right? And so, you know, and the new stuff is always the most profitable. Like they've worked really hard on making sure they can eke every bit of profit out of those. So they really want to, every time they launch a new set of things, they really want to sell as much as possible. You know, ideally all of the initial production line all needs to go, and that basically recoups the cost of developing the thing, such that after your initial run, basically everything else is more or less pure profit. Or maximal profit margins. So you need to get rid of your initial stock within like a month or two, and then over the next like 3 to maybe even sometimes 12 months, you then just sell as much as possible, and that improves the profit margin of GW as a whole. And that's kind of how that works. So that's why you don't see FAQs fixing factions for sometimes a year, because they basically haven't sold enough yet. They haven't sold enough stuff such that, because essentially if you've got the cost of producing a new set of models, right, and your first 3-month run you know, produces a profit margin of 10%, because you've got all those like creation costs to factor in, well then that 10% is lower than GW's overall profit margin. So you're actually, your proportional EBITDA, which is an accounting thing, which is how you value businesses sort of, but your kind of your kind of profitability measure is reduced actually by, even though you've actually made profit, it's because it's margins, you've affected the margins negatively. So they essentially wait until the profit margin on that line is at a certain threshold, i.e. the profit margin that they're targeting for the whole business, and then they can fix the models, because sales over that will automatically add to the profit margin, because, you know, as you sell more, the profit margin increases. So you need a certain volume of everything, which is why sometimes they fix stuff within 6 months, and why they sometimes take 12 months to fix things, because they haven't sold enough yet. It's you know, from a business perspective, it's really rather simple, and that's what James Workshop has been doing for the past, I would say, probably nearly 30 years. Certainly since the late 90s. It's for a very long time. That's what James has been doing. So, you know, expecting Games Workshop to change their tack is a bit daft. Expecting them to do anything other than that is daft, and I feel daft because I kind of expected the old world might be slightly different. It might be different this time round, is what I actually genuinely believed. And, you know, I feel foolish because, you know, I trusted them. I put my head in the tiger's mouth and it bit me, and I'm for some reason surprised by this. I know I shouldn't have been, but I was. Anyway, I'm over it now. I've re-understood that the thing is just a business, and actually, to be honest, I want them to make a decent chunk of money, because that means the business keeps going, and that means the project. Because if they don't make money, the business closes, and we don't have a game, or we don't have as well a supported a game as we have at the moment. I wish there was a bit more support, but you know, they've got their margins to think about, and they're pretty obsessed about that. Now, and here's where I think the kind of the philosophical discussion comes in that Pash was talking about. You know, the difference in philosophy between the camps of fans out there. Well, you have some fans who are, you know, it's a bit like, I'll talk about Creative Assembly actually, because it's easier to talk about somebody else. But within the Total War community, there was one guy called Legend of Total War. There are a few people like him, but there's one guy called Legend of Total War who a lot of the time spent his time whinging about how horrible Creative Assembly were. And he was right to do so, because they are, you know, pretty horrible. Like, they released, you know, they took everybody's money for poorly designed products that, you know, just were really shoddy, not worth the money at all, and, you know, released far too early, full of bugs, etc, etc. You know the drill. And, you know, he used to call them out on that. And then Creative Assembly had their community directors who used to be really nasty to him, like actually genuinely quite nasty. You you know, that there were other creators who were pretty horrid about him because they were pretty much you know, they weren't corporate shills, but they really liked the company and they really liked the product, and they thought the way to get better product was to work with CA in order to essentially improve future releases, and just say, well, look, well, that one's water under the bridge. We know that was a bit of a rubbish release, but let's work on together to make the next one better. And whereas Legends of Total War was more like, no, boycott them, put loads of comments on there, downvote them on Steam, like let's all spend a weekend going on Steam and just giving them 1 star for every single one of their products, and just put under that, like, you know, whichever expansion it was that we're unhappy with has ruined my impression, and just keep giving them 1 stars until they relent and fix it. And you know what, Legend actually, you know, got them to do something from time to time, because, you know, Steam allows you to vote on stuff. So actually that kind of activism, you know, it took a lot of effort, but it did work a couple of times. However, there's a lot of times when it didn't work and it just pissed everybody off. And so that's kind of, I think that's the philosophical difference, if there is one, is one where, you know, some people would rather work with the company to improve the product, and some people, so that's group number 1 really. Some people would rather, you know, carp and whinge about the product and hope that the company listen and improve the product. And, you know, to be honest, if they had any morals they would, but, you know, Tiger. And the third camp of people are people who, you know, don't really care either way. They're just happy playing the game and they're happy being part of the community. And, you know, if either of the other 2 camps, either the loyalists and the vagabonds, as if we want to call them, the loyalists and the no, not vagabonds, that's the wrong word, isn't it? Because they are on side, they're just antagonistically on side. And I think that's really it, because, like, some people are sympathetically on side with Games Workshop, some people are antagonistically on side with Games Workshop, i.e. they're only criticising because they care and they want the product to improve, and some people are, I guess, to an extent, antithetically on side, and I guess to an extent antithetically against as well, as in they, you know, they're not really that bothered, but they kind of want it to stick around. But then I guess there's another camp of people who aren't really that bothered and don't care if it, you know, if it goes away, because they'll, you know, there's other games that they can play and other stuff they can do. So, you know, I guess yeah, I don't need to get any more complicated in terms of the philosophical positions here. I don't think actually these occupy any traditional philosophical camps, though, because I was thinking, is it like a positivist, constructivist style debate, in that some people rely on feelings and some people, you know, rely on facts, and some people don't think facts exist outside of themselves, and some people believe that there is just one truth, and you know, it's anyway. And I don't think it's anything like that. I don't think it's like one of those deep-rooted philosophical discussions. I think it's more that you've got 2 groups of people, both of which you want the product to improve, but the approach to improvement, or the approach to getting those improvements, is kind of the opposite, because one's, like I said, antagonistic and one's sympathetic. And I think really it's a sort of a disagreement of approach, really, isn't it? It's more an that's a bit grandiose, isn't it? I was going to say it's an axiological discussion, in terms of, like, axiology is like I guess to an extent the study of how do you define value. Yeah, how do you define value? Like, how do you value something? How do you define whether something? How do you define good? You know, and different, or how do you define significant? You know, that's another. I don't even think it's that, though. I think I'm being a bit grandiose with that. I think it is literally just a case of some people are antagonistic and some people are sympathetic, but the sympathetic people are therefore antagonistic to the antagonists. So, you know, and I think, again, that kind of discourse is inevitable, and I think the way that, you know, stuff is talked about online, you know, that's you know, people write stuff online that they never say to anybody's face. But again, tiger. That's the reality of online discourse nowadays. And unless and until the platforms are properly regulated and made to account for all the comments that they publish on behalf of other people, because they do, I don't care what the legal position is, every single platform publishes our opinions, but they're the publisher, you know. At the moment, the legal position is like this video, I'm the publisher, so I get sued if I say anything slanderous, but you know, or defamatory if you want the broader term. But actually, realistically, it should be the platform. But anyway, that's my thoughts on all this stuff. Let me know if you want me to push out my Skaven book, and you know, I will. What we're going to talk about next week? Oh, I want to talk about Pash's suggestions for a FAQ, because I thought they were pretty good. I agree with most of them. There's some of them that I think are a bit bent, but some of them are interesting ideas. Actually, I probably won't talk about that. I'll just nick some of those ideas from my Arcane journals, because one of them in particular I quite like as a... So one of them he suggested as a rule for everybody, but I quite like it as a special rule for a faction. Anyway, that's it. I'm sure my boy will be here soon. There's lots of parents arriving, so I shall await the coach and go take him home. But anyway, thanks for listening. As ever, you know, like, subscribe, all that nonsense. Comment down below if you agree or disagree, or I read all the comments. If I just put a heart and a thumbs up next to it, I mean, I should just write I completely agree, really. Because I mean, basically, I don't really know what else to say, because like sometimes people say things and I'm like, yeah, that's the thing that that you've said and that I agree with. So, you know, like and heart, yeah. Should I love all the comments? Because I tend to, because I just love getting any feedback at all. I think all feedback's good, but I don't know. I don't see anybody else doing that, so I don't know if I'm being weird. But anyway, toodaloo.